Welcome to the Holiness Today podcast. On this Archives episode, listen as Neil Wiseman has a conversation with Samuel Young, General Superintendent for the Church of the Nazarene, on the topic of stewardship, tithing, and commitment. This recording was for the Ministers Tape Club in November of 1980.
We are so honored to have Dr. Samuel Young with us in the studio today to discuss stewardship, tithing, and commitment. Dr. Samuel Young served the Church of the Nazarene as a General Superintendent from 1948 until 1972. Dr. Young, you've written and preached and influenced an awful lot of people on the question of stewardship and faithful giving. What do you consider to be the basic issues of stewardship? How do we find motivation for ourselves and for our people?
The prime motivation for stewardship is Calvary. God's done so much for us in Jesus Christ that anything he asks you or me is reasonable. Now, I didn't want to go all the way with him. That's where I got hung up on the holiness question. I even bargained with God. I said, I'd pay 2 tithes if you let me out of the ministry. Confidentially, I thought I'd have more left by paying 2 and be a layman than paying 1 and being a minister. And the strange thing is, God took me up on it, both the 2 tithes and the ministry. But not legalistic. That's the real reason I wrote the little booklet, by the way, The Tithe is the Lord's. I wanted to say it in ordinary language, that it's not legalism. The tithe is not a legalism to be taught, though it is a method to be given. And I'd say one of the real needs in the local churches is that every pastor ought to speak definitely on giving once a year. And they're not averaging that in more than 20% of the churches, and that's a high guess.
You guess that only 20% of our pastors preach on stewardship once a year?
That's my guess.
Is that right?
It's not high.
I'm a long, long ways ahead of the average then. Talk to me about this legalism question in tithing again. In your judgment, if you follow that to its logical conclusion, it's not proper for a pastor to say the Bible requires you to tithe then. Is that right?
And we'll be right back.
Hi, my name is David Gilmore. I'm the pastor of Clyde Church of the Nazarene in British Isles South District, and I'm the author of the Foundry's Advent devotional resource for 2025, Hope of All the Earth. We live in a culture that's not designed for faithful waiting. Our world teaches us to demand instant gratification, and if we're not careful, we'll be swept along so quickly that we won't even notice. But into that relentless bullet train of life breaks the season of Advent, in which we're taught to slow down, to pause, to wait. Because the voice of Advent tells us again and again, not yet, not yet, not yet, but soon. And so the season of Advent brings a message of hope for the hopeless, peace for the restless, joy for those in despair, and abundant, extravagant, divine love for the unlovely and unloved. Hope of All the Earth is a journey for the entire faith community, offering daily reflections, discussion questions, and a space for journaling. It provides resources for pastoral, youth, and children's ministries to engage together, and it's available in both English and Spanish. We'd love you and yours to be a part of this journey of faithful, hopeful anticipation, and you can find more information in today's show notes.
Well, the origin of it is in the Old Testament.
Yes.
And Paul didn't teach tithing, but he taught giving. And he himself was a terrific example of selflessness. He even worked without pay and then apologized to them afterwards for doing it. There was I think his tongue was in his cheek when he apologized, though. And he was sensitive to their sensitiveness on it, but he was out to bring them up to be normal. No, the real motivation of it must be Calvary, and it must be spiritual. And if we'll lead them into the experience of heart holiness, which requires what the old-timers called the great commitment. It's bottomless. It's timeless, though it's not irrevocable. You can back down. That's why renewal is necessary in the church, so that we're not going just remembering the time we said yes.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, I believe in what the old-timers call the eternal yes, but there's no eternal yes spiritually that eliminates the daily yes. And God has a way, of jolting all of us up periodically. I didn't want to preach. I didn't want to be a DS.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to be a GS.
Mm-hmm.
But the issue is, you've got to get the place where you want to do the will of God. And one of the finest quotations I ever read came from Dante. It's in his classical work. And one literary critic, who's not even an evangelical Christian, he said the greatest single line of poetry he ever read came from Dante, originally in Latin, translated to English is, "In his will is our peace."
Mm-hmm.
And the setting in Dante was, in his famous work, there were three areas: the purgatory, paradise, and inferno, hell. And it was the angels who were supervising purgatory. Somebody said to them, "But you're not away up near the throne like the folk in paradise." And the angels answered, "In his will is our peace."
Mm-hmm.
And that's the place for happy Christian living. And I think God has a way of with all of us, jolting us periodically. Are we willing to go? And I think also in the area of giving, the pastor himself must be generous.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus doesn't teach show-off giving, although he did underscore. His illustrations are tremendous. That woman that put in everything, small amount, but percentage-wise, frightening. And actually, it's also true that he underscored the man that not only spent what he had to help the man in need, but he obligated himself, made a pledge. Almost spoils the folk that say they won't pledge. They ignore Jesus. And I get it in the gospel that with Calvary, the word says he gave his son, and will he not with him freely give us all things? And you can't judge it simply by the money statistics. And I'm not interested in a poll. I'm not interested in posting a list on tithers. I don't. The best kind is the kind that doesn't show it off and doesn't tell it. And
How do you how as a pastor do I go about getting new Christians to be faithful stewards or tithers?
I'd say preach on second blessing holiness and the conditions of receiving. And that's where we would begin.
So the issue of total commitment or consecration,
Yes,
is where the issue of stewardship and tithing really.
it must have its rise. And of course, it rests on Calvary.
Mm-hmm.
It rests on Calvary. It's the grace of God that bringeth salvation. Of course, stewardship has its rise even in creation. What is it, the 103rd Psalm? It is He that madeth, and not we ourselves. Augustine used to love to quote that, and I think he put his tongue in his cheek when he said it. So that redemption has its rise in God, who is our Creator. What hast thou that thou didst not receive? Paul dared to dig in on that letter to the Corinthians. What hast thou that thou didst not receive?
Well, that's very hopeful and intriguing to me. That there really is an intersection between our central message and the demand for receiving it, and the question of stewardship.
And it is showing up in our church today in this deferred giving, and particularly with folk who've gone into business for themselves. No names. And it's a delicate thing, but I've seen them where they would take a modest salary out of their business and plow everything into the business.
Exactly.
And pay the tithe on their modest salary. Then as you get up near the end, if they live to be as old as I am, they get scared and say, I can't have very long. And but it's the gospel that gives them the feeling, I owe God some out of this that I have piled up.
Very good.
One man said, now my wife wouldn't give like I'm giving. She said, no, I wouldn't. But he said, I struggle so hard to make it and struggle so hard to save it. I don't want it squandered when I die. I want God to have some of it. And I wanted to work for God's kingdom even after I'm gone. Not bad. But that obligation, and if you check the background, small town church, simple, uncomplicated gospel, but that's where it gave him the feeling that God was the true owner.
That's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you for listening to the Holiness Today podcast. If you enjoyed this production and wish to hear more, visit holinesstoday.org/podcast or find us on Spotify, Apple, and Google Podcasts.